Someone make it make sense.
Probably a couple.
Hello, squirrel friends. We are here today in Idaho, yesterday in Wisconsin, today in Idaho. So just a couple states over, to the left, as it were. So we are going to start out with part one here of this hearing for the motion to change venue, which only just happened a couple days ago on Thursday, August 29th. And as per usual, this is from the judge's court feed, which is through Zoom. He has, as you guys have seen before. Shout out to Kid Smiths. Kid Smiths hasn't been keeping up with this case. Totally fine. We are glad to have you. And I mean, you know, we're still obviously pre-trial. Not expected to go to trial until next summer. But this is the just little overview here. This is the motion to change venue. So this has been a long time coming, right? This motion was first, oh goodness, filed months ago. And there's been a lot of, preliminary hearings on this matter, as well as court filings regarding it, and gearing up towards this. And just to kind of give a little bit of an overview, leading up to this hearing, Bryan Kohberger's defense attorneys hired, they have actually, I think, 4 experts, maybe 5, but their main one is this Dr. Edelman. And Dr. Edelman specializes in surveys of like jury pools, basically. And so in preparation for this, they had Dr. Edelman survey the jury pool in Latah County, as well as like surrounding counties, and gather data in order to conclude if, how much pretrial publicity and bias and whatnot, right? In other words, if the jury pool is poisoned and there needs to be a change of venue. And so, and then again, there's numerous other experts as well, which we're gonna hear from all of them today. And I will say one thing that is really noteworthy is that Judge has not ruled on this yet, but at the end of the hearing, just to give you guys an idea of just kind of how significant this is, Judge at the end of this hearing says that this is the most difficult decision he's ever had to make in his entire life. I don't remember if he says entire life or entire career, but either way, something to that effect, which that's a lot, saying a lot, right? So I don't know that we'll be getting a ruling anytime soon, but that gives you an idea as to like the significance of this decision. So the other thing that's interesting is that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, I can't remember actually what counties they were initially in, but they both had their trials in Ada County, but that was not the original venue. Like they did get their venue changed to Ada County due to, pretrial publicity and all that, right? Defendant's Sixth Amendment rights. So, so Kismet, you're in the middle of Jason Mengel's police interview. His police interview. Is this, we've already watched this, I mean, right? I mean, I'm trying to think. His police interview. Which one are you talking about? And what insane thing just came up? Are you saying you noticed something that we didn't notice on the stream? I will say just to that effect real quick about, I know, so as far as last night's stream, there was so much information. I'm kind of thinking about trying to do like a distilled version of some of the most salient points because there's so much. I'm also wanting to put together a thing that would outline Ezra's theory of what happened, like in a way that makes it more concise. But one thing I wanted to point out that I noticed when I was doing the timestamps that we didn't notice when it was during the live stream, is that those text messages with John Hanson about the prone position, where Ezra said something about, I want you to tie me up and whatnot, and sent those pictures. We had missed the part where they say the date. The date was February 10th, which is huge because remember, like I was saying last night, the jury hasn't heard whatever really happened with those allegations. But the fact that that came in because of Ezra's own testimony about the prone position is huge, because they know that the allegations against him were on February 4th and February 5th. And then she's texting him on February 10th with that. So that's huge. And again, the date kind of flew by. We kind of missed it. So, oh, so you're saying this is an interview that didn't come in trial. Okay. Right, correct. February 10th would be after he allegedly, I see. Right. So this didn't come in trial. Okay. So were you doing outside research, Kismets? I will say I'm definitely going to want to watch any of those interviews that didn't come in at trial. I think it might be better to watch them after we finish the trial. Again, just so we can keep track of what came in and what didn't come in. You know what I mean? Can you give me a brief overview though? Because now I'm like, oh my gosh, what? No, don't save it. I'm still curious what it says. I mean, again, we will watch it after we finish with the trial. I'm curious what the information is. Good to know though. I guess that's on YouTube, so that's good. I don't think that was on the Court TV archives page, because again, I think that was only just literally the trial. Because I don't remember seeing that video. Oh, you know what? Okay, so I had a theory about this because of Ted. I already can tell you where this is probably going. I had a theory because of the part about Ted. I don't know if you guys remember me being like, I don't know if I made a joke or I made a comment, but like, I was like, was he bisexual? Did he have a male lover? And what's really interesting is if that's the case, dude, how wild would that be? Because so many of those entries, right, where he's writing about him referring to a guy, and Ezra's whole thing is like he's talking about her. Oh my god. Okay, I don't know where it's going. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, then tell me where it's going. I still want to know who Ted is, though. I want to know where it's going. So it's not that. Okay. Oh, okay. So you said Jason does establish this interview that Alex was possibly bi or gay. Okay. All right. So okay. That's what I was on the right track with that. Wow, this is crazy. The defense must have kept this out because this would have been great for the prosecution, huh? Right. The police asked Jason why he thinks Alex would be interested. The police asked Jason why he thinks Alex would be interested in Ezra, given she's sent the right. I think I can maybe see where that's going on. Jason's answer starts with because according to Ezra, she could be his right. Yep, that makes perfect sense. Yep. Interesting. Okay, let us know, Kit Smits. Wow. So I wonder if there is anything to that Ted. Because Ezra's like, there was no Ted. Maybe there was a Ted. Interesting. Huh. Okay, Kit Smits is going to let us know what he says. I'm going to go ahead and pull up. Hold on. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Well, they're going to get going here. Filtering in, it looks like, into a little bit of chit chat going on. Nice judge. Nice. Okay, I'm going to go forward a little bit until Judge is seated. Oh, there's the defendant. There's the defendant. Oh, Kit Smits says, okay. She said that she was his chance for a normal life. He'd never have to explain to his family that he was more into like, right. Yeah, this makes total sense to me completely. You know, and all this explains the boy in the arm, right? Because that was the thing that even with her on direct, they were like, they didn't offer an explanation. That it was like, I don't know why I did it, right? I mean, essentially, it was like to try to frame Alex for all the stuff that happened, right? It's just that we didn't have all the information. Interesting. Because the fact that the way, okay, him calling her a boy had a whole different meaning, I guess, right, than what we knew about. It's the way he refers to it as Alex, Gordon, as we're being into younger boys that made me just, oh my God. Yikes. Oh boy. Holy crap. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's why that didn't come in then, huh? I mean, that's clearly a problem. Right. I see what you're saying, Kit Smits. I'm not going to pull that comment up, but I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's, ooh. That to me is surprising, that part, right? Because he seems to have so much integrity and stuff, but wow. And ethics, right? Wow. Interesting. And it's interesting that Ezra told him this stuff too, right? Wow. Yeah, I guess I guess in terms of Jason, none of his interviews came in. It was just the body cam, right? Of like the police and stuff. But like, yeah, none of his interviews came in. That's interesting because we know he was interviewed a fuck ton of times, and I didn't even. Was there something in there that had to do with age? Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Right. She could have been trying to make Alex look bad in hopes to save their relationship. I mean, that could have still been her also trying to frame it in like this blame the other person thing, right? Like, interesting. I mean, it does kind of make me want to watch these now. Like, now I'm like, oh my God, instead of waiting for the end of the trial. I don't know, because it would give so much context to a lot of this with her testimony on the stand, right? Uh-oh. Now I got to think about that. Right. Yeah, Kit Smits. So what do you think? I mean, this would, I know you haven't watched all of it, But I'm going to go ahead and say, just remember, like I was saying last night, right? Based on just like when we watched some of those clips again of Jason Mengel's testimony last night. And remember how I noticed that thing about his mouth? And I was saying how it seems like he's so much more information, but he knows he can't fully answer these questions because there's stuff that can't come in. I mean, all these things where there's like gaps in information, right? That are like driving us crazy, well, me crazy. Jason he has to know all of it, right? I mean, he's the dude, and he's so candid. So keep what? Well, I would rather you hang out with us though, Kit Smits. If you want to keep watching it, you could stay in the chat, but like I don't know. I kind of if I'm thinking about it, I almost feel like it might be, even though again it would be like stuff that didn't come in at trial. Granted, it's also not a live trial. Like it's a little bit different than Karen Reed because there's already a verdict, and anyway, I don't know. Maybe that's a way to kind of justify bringing this extrinsic evidence in. So how did you learn about it? What made you go looking for it? Like what did you search for? Also, hi, Kat Randall. Happy to see you. So right, at least after we finish the trial, yeah. I'm just wondering though if where we're at now, because we're in Ezra's testimony, like if after we finish her testimony, if it would be more beneficial. Because by the time we get to the end of the trial, like because there's going to be the whole sentencing and all that, it's going to be kind of it's going to be kind of removed from the things that are the issues that are at hand right now with her testimony, right? Regarding her relationships with these people, like those things are going to be more. We're going to have many, many episodes between, if that makes sense. And like I don't know that it would feel as relevant, Okay, you just Googled them. Okay, I don't know. I'm thinking it might be. Okay. I mean, the only reason to not watch it now, when we finish Ezra's testimony, would just simply be because it's like only watching what comes in at trial, right? Having said that, that was never really that was never, even though that was the mentality for Karen Reed, and there was reasons for that, specifically with that case, that was never like my intention setting out with Ezra. It's just that there wasn't other stuff available, right? Like, in other words, with Ezra, had there been pretrial hearings and documents and stuff, like I've looked for them, I couldn't find them, but had there been other stuff that didn't come in at trial, I would have covered it. So I guess I never made the choice to only have stuff that came in at trial. I didn't know there was other things. So I'm thinking that, again, the mindset's a little bit different. Yeah, they did televise the, I don't know what you mean by witness statements, but the victim, at her sentencing, that everybody talks, if that's what you mean, Kat. Did you happen to see any court documents, like with the motions in limine and stuff like that, or did you just see the Jason interviews? I did search for pretrial hearings. I could not find any pretrial hearings. I've searched for pretrial hearings and I've searched for, the court documents, but like I've mentioned, you have to be in Wisconsin unless somebody has put them on the internet somewhere. But I mean, every time I searched, I couldn't come up with anything doing searching. So, okay. Gotcha. If you do come across anything else, do let me know. But, okay. So Kit Smits, just to recap, Kit Smits was Googling Jason Mengel and came across some interviews that he had with law enforcement that didn't come in at trial. And it sounds like that we know Jason knows all the tea. And I'm thinking that it might be really relevant to watch these once we finish Ezra's testimony, which will be probably tomorrow. And while it's relevant, right, Ezra's car, right. Okay. So I think I'm leaning towards watching it while it's relevant with her after her testimony. Thank you so much for letting me know, Kitsmits. I'm thinking I'm thinking that. In which case, I don't know, you may want to hold off. I mean, I know it's up to you, but you may want to hold off because what I'm thinking is we would be doing this would be for tomorrow night. I already have the rest of like her testimony and stuff done, so I would just tack on these interviews with Jason. Oh, is it Rottweiler Investigations? So I think there's some videos on the Court TV archives that they don't have on there. But that is the most complete playlist, if that's what you're referencing. But I'm sure as you've seen, there's no commentary or anything like that. And also they put labels on there, and they actually, I think there's been times I've noticed where they would like mislabel who was on the stand or what, like I don't think they know the legal terminology. Anyway, it's, I'm really picky about how things are labeled with like the day of the trial and what's happening, but anyway, but I did see that when I was initially looking to see if this whole trial was on YouTube. That was the most complete one that I found. But I remember comparing it to the Court TV archives, and it looked like it was missing some things. But it looks like they also have some things that's not on the Court TV archives, because the Court TV archives is just what's there. So. Okay, let's go ahead and see. So we got the defendant has entered the building. There's Judge.
Good morning. So let's get on the record, please.
On the record.
We're now on the record. This is State versus Bryan Kohberger, case number CR 29222805.
You know what?
Mr. Kohberger is in the.
I should swoop. Hold on. Let me swoop real quick.
But you'll agree with me, justice in general is a good thing?
Big fan of justice.
All right, me too. No further questions.
All right, cool. Swoop.
Courtroom. He is represented by Ms. Taylor, Mr. Logston, and Ms. Nassif. The state is represented by Mr. Thompson. Ms. Jennings, okay, I didn't see you immediately. Ms. Beatty and Mr. Nye. We're here on a motion to change venue from Latah County to Ada County, filed by the defense. Preliminary, anything, Mr. Thompson?
And Your Honor, not in the state.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Ms. Taylor?
We know who
Your
that
Honor,
is.
just that there is a stipulation that the court received the exhibits that were filed along with our declaration and our memorandum in support. That's correct, Your Honor.
All right, so we're talking about all those slides? There were like 100 slides.
There were 100 slides, Your Honor. We're talking about those, but in particular, the references to all of the media coverage, the articles that were contained, the table with the links to all of the articles that depict all of the media coverage.
So are you going to show those publicly, or those are for me because I'm the one who has to make the decision?
Those are for you. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
We'll have PowerPoint presentations today, but we will not be going through the hundreds of articles that have been provided for the court's consideration.
Well, I'm thankful for that, because I did look through all that, and I thought, oh, this would be not a good thing to, push out to the public, because we're trying to protect that, right?
Your Honor, we are, and I think it would take an extraordinary amount of court time to try to read through all of the articles or review all of the.
By the way, I just looked it up because it was going to drive me crazy. So just to reiterate, because I mentioned it earlier, as just to compare, right? Because Idaho. So Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, of course, also in Idaho, they both were initially in Fremont County, and they both of them, you know, they were tried separately, but they both wanted to move to Ada County due to potential juror bias, and their motions to change venue were granted. And of course, it was a different judge, Judge Boyce, but they were granted to change venue from Fremont to Ada. And again, what's interesting here is that the defense wants to change venue from, in this case, right, in Bryan Kohberger's case, they want to change venue from Latah to Ada. So if this does get granted, they very well may end up having their trial in the exact same courthouse and courtroom where Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow had their trials. So
Bits of news coverage that have happened in this case. We do intend to offer a little bit of a preview throughout our testimony, but certainly not the hundreds of articles and news stories that have existed.
Well, that was my other concern. So,
we love a good PowerPoint.
all right. Well, call your first witness.
Governor Ms. Massa, we'll start.
Okay. Mathis, thank you.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Your Honor, as we get started here today, what I'd like to do is provide you with a roadmap of where we're going with our witnesses.
Okay.
The standard here is whether there's a reasonable likelihood that pretrial publicity has affected the impartiality of prospective jurors. To establish the quantity of pretrial publicity, we will call James Todd Murphy with true scope. To establish effect on partiality, we will call Dr. El-Alayli to discuss the social science behind juror decision-making. Then we will call Dr. Bryan Edelman about the survey and what it means. And finally, we will call Dr. Dare about the validity of the survey methodology. We are not calling today Scott Sunby, but as you listen to testimony today,
He was my
please
favorite.
keep his sworn affidavit in mind.
Yeah.
With
So
his
when I covered all of these the documents leading up to this, Scott Sunby was my favorite of all their experts, and he's not going to testify today.
9 years of studying capital juries and teaching at the National Judicial College, he is considered by the United States Supreme Court an expert in this area. He has published this book. It's called A Life and Death Decision, A Jury Weighs the Death Penalty. And this book is a culmination of interviews of over 1,200 capital jurors and how capital juries make decisions.
Interesting.
Research shows that when a small community creates pressure to impose death, an Eighth Amendment violation may occur. Through these witnesses today, we want to avoid beginning a trial with, as Mr. Sunby states, quote, a thumb on death's side of the scale, end quote. And with that, I call James Todd Murphy.
Okay, thank you.
Very, very good opening little statement, if you will. Not normal opening statement, but in this case, preamble.
Mr. Murphy, come on up.
All right,
By the way,
here we go. First witness.
however you can find your way through.
However you can find your way.
And please face the clerk, raise your hand.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I
do.
really like
All right.
Judge.
Thank you, sir. Please
Hi,
have a
Manu,
seat
happy to
there.
see you.
And once you're seated, please state your name and spell your last.
I think Kitsmans has gone back to watching Jason's interview.
James Todd Murphy. I go by Todd, my middle name. Last name is Murphy.
All right. Sir.
Classic. Knowing.
Mr. Murphy, how are you employed?
I'm the president of True Scope. That's spelled TRUESCOPE. It's one word.
And can you explain what True Scope is?
Sure. True Scope is a media monitoring and analysis service. We wrap our arms around all the media types out.
Part of why, okay, this goes beyond what you might expect or what I expected, right? Like, this goes beyond just like, okay, there's prejudice, I want to change venue. There's like, this is why I wanted to cover this, is because when they had their initial, like it was like a pre-hearing on this, and they had the experts come in just for their preliminary, testimony as to why they should be allowed to conduct the juror surveys. I was like, oh my God, this is so fascinating. It was really educational. It was not at all what I expected. So this guy is the president of True Scope, which they collect data about media. So we're going to learn something here, guys. Like even just beyond this case, right?
They can do it on a global level or a geographically isolated level. Normalize all that data from television, radio, newspapers, magazines, social media, online sources. Index that with metadata so we know date, time, placement. We assign sentiment metrics to it. And from that, we can extract data sets for what our clients need, specific to topics or phrases.
Can you explain how you track this media intelligence that you just described?
Sure. So we have feeds that are coming in. For example, we acquire a feed from X, formerly Twitter. We have an online feed that accesses all available online sources. We have a broadcast feed of TV, radio, and podcasts. All those feeds come into us as they're broadcasted, as they're posted, as they air or are printed. We don't do any modification of the text or the context. We just take it as it was provided by the.
I'm gonna see how he does at 1.25, not because he's talking slow or anything, but because this is a really long hearing, and I'm hoping to be able to do it maybe in 2 parts if we can. So let's just see. We'll see if it's doable here with 1.25.
The content owner, index store, and then when queries against it.
Where did you travel from to be with us here today?
Our North America headquarters are in Omaha, Nebraska, where I live.
Would you tell the court about your background in media intelligence?
Sure, might sound cliche, but I was born into the business. My father acquired a press clipping service called Universal Press Clipping Bureau in 1959. Eventually met my mother. Without further detail, eventually
Oh my God, that's hilarious. She's like, tell us about your background. It's like he's going into how his parents met. I love it. Look at George. Look at Judge. Look at Judge. Let me pull the banner down so you guys can better see his wonderful smile. I love this. Look at how amused he is. Here, hold on. Let me back that up a second because this is really funny to me. I love Judge. Watch.
eventually met my mother.
Watch his face.
Without further detail, eventually I became in existence. It's a technical phrase. I'm
Oh my
sure.
God, that's hilarious.
So working alongside my father growing up was just part of the DNA. I studied psychology and communications in college, and when I graduated, the internet was beginning to become a thing. And so I saw a future of data mining and expanding what was a press clipping service into the future. So my full-time employment with Universal at the time started in 1991 and came to today.
Beyond your 30 years of experience that you've described in your educational background, do you have other qualifications in this area?
Yes. So in the mid-90s, I developed a framework for comparative media analysis where we could take those data sets and compare. My first project was letting hospitals compare themselves to others to see how one brand of a hospital might compare to another within a community or market. I also invented the first multi-channel media monitoring software that would let us monitor multiple TV channels on one computer and write the closed captioning text to a database simultaneously.
Speaking of closed captioning, I have another idea too. Let me see if I can make this super fancy. Let's see if I can do all the fancy things. Let's try this, guys. Let's see if they, okay, let's see how this does. You know, sometimes it's not as accurate, but let's just see. And I think I can also move them. Let's try this. Let's be fancy. Let's be fancy, guys. All right, let's see what happens. Okay.
Innovations not quite as exciting as those continued throughout the years.
Cool.
I also made other acquisitions, which I then folded into Universal, buying up other monitoring services in Alaska or Wisconsin, wherever. Eventually, merged my company with TrueScope, a technology company out of Australia. TrueScope owns Universal Information Services at this point, and we're adding AI and other natural language processing tools that we do.
What about organizations? Are you part of any organizations in this field?
I am. There's a global organization of all media intelligence services called FIVEP. That's spelled F-I-V as in boy, E-P as in Paul. Every continent except the uninhabited ones have many, often multiple media intelligence or media monitoring services. They belong, or most belong to this organization. My peers in this organization elected me president to lead this organization at a global level last year. I'm currently the president of feedback.
And have you ever testified related to your expertise before?
I have been asked to do that. Yes.
Before you start talking about the data in this case, how closely have you followed this case on a factual level?
I kind of have a personal standard operating procedure that when a client engages us on a topic that I feel for our company may become contentious or may have downstream effects, or I might be called to objectively testify, I purposely removed myself from evaluating the content of the data set related to the subjects that are asking us to monitor. So while I have made myself familiar with the search strategy, the keywords, the phrases, which would include the defendant's name and the family names of the students that are victims, I have done very little. I paid very little attention to the media exposure on this. In fact, I just learned that the judge of this case has a last name that sounds like he was born for this role. That was last night.
That is amazing.
Coincidence. My apologies for not knowing who you were until last night. Thank you.
That is really funny. I like this guy. He's got a good sense of humor. That's really funny. He's saying, I knew very little about this case at all. In fact, I only just today learned that the judge, and look at Judge's face. He's like, I only just learned that the judge in this case, referring to Judge, has a last name as if he was born for this job. Hilarious.
Are you familiar with Ms. Saucier, who testified last year in this case?
Yes, Jean Saucier is my right-hand person. She's a senior vice president of client success. She has a media measurement background.
His name
that started years before she came to be under my employment. I would venture to say she's as much of an expert in this area as I am. And if she was actually here, I'd probably say she's more of an expert, but since she's not, I'll claim that for myself.
So for context purposes, when she testified about data in TrueScope, is it the same set of data that you've just testified to?
Exact same data. We work at the same company. We have access to the exact tools. She works with clients directly as yourself. And I work directly with her.
How is TrueScope using media intelligence in this case?
I'll say it maybe functionally. We have been asked by you, our client, to track specific topics related to this case, names associated, and I might say the more unique a phrase is, the more accurate our media monitoring can be. If the name was John Smith and Susan Jones, then we have to do much more Boolean logic, apply more Boolean logic to make sure that we're focused on extracting it's very specific. So for you, we've built a search query using Boolean logic and AI to focus on the stories that are of interest in this case. The second half of what we're doing, so that's the media monitoring. We first capture the data, that creates a data set. Then that data set is analyzed by our analysis team, which is led by Cheryl Lewis, Theril, Lewis, Lewis. And she has an assistant data analyst who they're trained in a way that we call cross-coder proficiency. So whether Cheryl analyzes a story or Harry, her assistant analyzes it, they analyze it in the same manner. That also creates a check and balance that if something in the media monitoring function picks up a story that matches the name Judge, but for some reason isn't a Judge associated with this case, the analyst then at a human level can say that's the wrong Judge, and it would.
Okay, so what he's saying is important here. He's saying that in order for them to figure out what is out there for the publicity, right, pretrial publicity, he's saying that they use AI, but then they also have humans that can correct AI's mistakes essentially and say it's the wrong judge, which it makes sense, right? Because given his last name, you could see how that could be a thing. So let me briefly, just because I had some of you guys were asking, oh my God, what is happening? I was just going to try to move the subtitles down. Okay, so you guys can see my mouse hopefully. All right, so right here, this is one of the prosecutors, not the lead prosecutor. Lead prosecutor is right here, Bill Thompson, aka Prosecutor Santa. And hold on, just because Spicy Santa for when he gets spicy, hopefully. So he's the lead prosecutor. And why can't you guys see my mouse again? Hold on. Okay, here we go. So there's my mouse. So there he's lead prosecutor, but this is a different prosecutor who's doing direct examination right now. Okay. Here is the defendant, and here is his lead attorney, the blonde lady in the thumbnail, Ann Taylor. That's her right there. She's his lead counsel. And just to reiterate, so she's court appointed, and it's a death penalty case, but she already has made her way into my list of favorite, top favorite, whatever, defense attorneys, because she's a force and she's incredible. She really is. and I can elaborate on that if anyone's interested, but I've talked about it before, so I don't want to be redundant, but yeah, she's amazing. And he got really lucky with her. I will say that much. And then of course he's got other counsel, like that dude right there. I don't remember his name, but he's one of the defense attorneys, and there's others, like both the defense and the prosecution teams for this case. There's numerous attorneys. So yeah, but that's Ann Taylor right there, and she's the one. So in the thumbnail, you would have seen Ann Taylor because she's the lead defense attorney. You would have seen Bill Thompson because he's the lead prosecutor, and then you would have seen, of course, Judge there in the middle, the Honorable John C. Judge. So, all right, let's keep going.
Would be removed from the data set at the analysis.
What objectives is TrueScope trying to achieve in this case?
We've been primarily asked to look at the without even being hyperbolic, let's say an extreme amount of media coverage, its impact on a population or a community, and the statistical volume of that media exposure on various communities across the U.S., but focused on several counties within Idaho.
How long has TrueScope been gathering data for Mr. Kohberger's case?
I believe we were engaged on February 15th, 2023. We have some ability to pull some data forward from that time, but that's when technically the engagement came.
And you've talked about the media types and the data that's gathered. Is area or location of media coverage able to be determined?
Yes, in those cases, maybe I'll separate that into two areas of media. You have traditional media, which would be television, radio, newspapers, magazines, even online news sources. Those are all tied to a specific city and state. You have the Moscow Daily News, and the metadata that we have attached to that source would say, okay, that publication name is in the city of Moscow, in the state of Idaho, and has a circulation figure of, I'll say, hypothetically 3,000 readers. I don't know the exact circulation on that specific paper. For television, each television news affiliate, local news comes from what's called a local news affiliate. It may be the ABC affiliate, but it may have call letters such as KXLY, I think is one of the Spokane channels. And they may be an NBC or an ABC affiliate, but they're the local affiliates who's in charge of airing local news. And Nielsen media data, Nielsen services, you may have heard of.
Nielsen media, I've heard of that.
Boxes and market lines and things like that. They know that that station is in this city, in this state, and each affiliate is part of a DMA, a designated market area. Stop me if I'm going too far down the rabbit hole, but a designated market area, although the news may come out of Spokane, Washington, the designated market area is a radius around that can take in additional cities, counties, and at the functional level, consumers of news, viewers in this case.
Is frequency of media coverage able to be determined?
Yeah, we since on television, newspapers, online, demographics can change over time, can change by day. So a good example of frequency, why frequency matters. A local news affiliate might have a 6 to 7 a.m. newscast, a midday newscast, a 5 p.m. and a 10 p.m. Depending on what time zone you're in, those can be adjusted based on network. But let's say that they ran a story about anything. They might run it in the morning where the demographics skew one way. They might run it at midday, which might have a much smaller audience or potential viewership. They might run it at 5 o'clock, which would have people who come home from work early or those who are unemployed. And then at 10 o'clock generally can be the largest audience. So knowing what time they run it lets us know the demographics, the audience, and even a vanity metric called ad values. We won't get into that, but what time a story airs and how many times it runs, we aggregate that and we can say, okay, this story ran 4 times on this channel on one day and had a total viewership potential of, say, 50,000. That doesn't mean I watched it at all 4 times. That just means the viewership at each of those times has the potential to see it. And that's where frequency comes into play.
Are there types of media coverage that TrueScope does not gather?
We don't track anything that's illegal. We don't go behind, we don't penetrate privacy rules, such as your personal Facebook pages if they're marked to private. We also don't look at streaming entertainment channels such as Peacock, Hulu, where the content on those channels often is broadcast originally in a specific time zone. We call that an ephemeral broadcast, where it aired at 5 o'clock and then was lost to the ether. But Hulu and those streaming channels give the opportunity for that story then to be posted, and you can watch it at your leisure in a time shifting. We don't monitor those adjacent streaming channels, A, because they're subscription based, demographics are different, and we already have the content as it was aired originally.
I'm going to hand you what's been stipulated and admitted as a part of Exhibit C. I've shown the state, Your Honor.
Oh, good, an exhibit.
Thank you.
Can you tell the court what that is?
That is
Should be chilling.
a very base
Oh my
level
God, I
spreadsheet
forgot
of all the
Fraser.
media
That's
exposure.
gorgeous.
Just to get some of the topics specific to this account that you've engaged us for, including
That's
the topics that
correct,
you've specified. We monitor
Yes, that's correct.
for your account.
Yep.
It includes various things like the type of media, so it might be Twitter
His job is to assess the media coverage on this case, right?
or print or broadcast. It would include the metadata we include, city, state, circulation, viewership, things like that. There's also hyperlinks. As a client of ours, you would receive, if you exported this from your workspace or we exported it for you, you would have a hyperlink. You would click on that. Because we have a cookie on your computer, it would open that hyperlink and you could see the full story. Unless it's an online story or a social media story, then we take you directly to that end source. So if it's MoscowDailyNews.com and it's in front of their paywall, you would click on that link and you can view that story yourself.
Is Exhibit C in front of you specific to Latah County?
Yes, I see under county, spot checking it and spinning through where it can be determined. These are all Latah County related. Some of them are cities within Latah County.
Is the list of Exhibit C approximately 1,360 entries long?
Wow.
Yes, I can confirm that's the number of rows, which each row would indicate a individual media mention, or also known as a media story, an article or a news story on a broadcast.
And Your Honor, I won't have him hand that to you now, but for purposes of the record, that will be a paper copy for the court's file. You have that in an Excel spreadsheet that's much easier to read than what is in that paper in there.
Right, okay, so this was agreed by the state too. So I just want to make sure, because I have the exhibit C also that was attached to your brief,
Which is
which is 300 pages. So, but then we have the additional C, which is more, I guess, thorough.
so this is a part of C related to TrueScope, which is this list of the 1,300 stories. And then I'm about to get into the other part of Exhibit C, which is TrueScope's report.
Okay, great, thank you. Just wanted to clear that up.
Did you prepare some other documents that represent media coverage in 4 counties in Idaho for this case?
We did. Once TrueScope had and it's an ongoing thing. We're constantly monitoring your news. So even this morning, you would have received a report of any media exposure that has happened since yesterday morning. It runs on a 24-hour cycle where we pushed out a report to the clients, but we're collecting it in real time. So if a client wanted to look at their workspace at 3 p.m. today, all that news would be in there. I may have digressed from your question.
I'm pausing it real quick for a couple things. So just so you guys don't freak out, when the screen goes black, that's not me. That's whenever they're switching over like inputs from like one source to another from the court computer or whatever. And then also we have these pie charts, and we saw these actually in that the memorandum, the 300 and like something page memorandum that I covered. So we've seen these, but he's going to discuss it here.
That's I'm going to hand you an exhibit.
Okay.
This is the second part of C. And I'm going to put that in front of you because it might be easier to see. You've got 2 screens.
Yes, that was the second part of my answer. We did prepare a media measurement analysis. Cheryl Lewis's team, and that's part of the combination of services that we're providing.
Okay, looking at this page here, can you please explain to the court what this is?
Sure. You have 2 pie charts. On the left, you have the volume of media coverage specific to the keywords and phrases searched for our client related to this case. You see on the left, out of all the media coverage between January 2023 and July 15th, 36% of that coverage, or just over 36% of that, was seen or had the opportunity to be seen in Latah County. On the right side, you have another pie chart that shows the population of Idaho, and it shows what percentage Latah County represents of the total percentage of Idaho, which is 2.75%.
On the second bullet point of notes there's some reference to census. Can you explain that note?
Sure. The census data used for this was from, I believe, July of 23. Of the 40,924 people in Latah County, we were asked to look at age eligible to serve on jury duty amongst all of that, the people in the county, which equated to 61%, or just under 25,000 people of the nearly 41,000 are age eligible to serve on the jury.
Right.
In Latah.
Going to the next page. What does this page tell the board?
This is the same analysis framework performed on a
As
different.
you can see, the point here is to compare the media exposure between Ada County and Latah County, because Ada County is their county of choice to move for the change of venue.
County. Again, on the left, you see the total media coverage in Idaho for the same date range, but 34%
Oh,
of the
definitely.
media coverage
They
was
know what they're
seen in Ada County, which is just a couple percentage points below that of Latah County.
And I just realized I misspoke, and I don't have my banner up right now. So because he's on direct examination, the attorney who's questioning him right now is actually another defense attorney. It's Miss Masoff. I think I said it was a prosecutor, but it's actually because this was the defense's motion. This is and it's direct examination. That's actually one of Bryan Kohberger's defense attorneys. So I just realized I misspoke on that. Just so used to covering trials and it being prosecutor on direct. So.
The primary difference is the right-hand pie chart, which shows the population of Ada County relative to all of Idaho. And it's over a quarter of the state population, 78 or 26.42%.
What conclusions do you draw when you compare the two counties' data?
There's a lot more people in Ada County.
Mm-hmm.
And where I would be going with that as a media analysis, when I would interpret this from a media analysis perspective, is the propensity to dilute the media exposure in a larger population is a factual function of that. If you have a certain number of stories divided by the population, the number of stories a person can see is fewer if the population is larger. But, did that answer your question? Or was I,
Okay, I'll follow up with another specific one. Out of the two counties, where is the most opportunity for a resident to view stories about this case?
It's by far in Ada County. When we did the analysis of the age eligible process, nearly 300,000 people in Ada County are jury age eligible compared to just under 25,000 in Latah.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna just ask my question again. It was probably inartful on my part. Do more people in Latah County, is there more saturation in Latah County or more saturation with media coverage in Ada County?
Yes. A person in Latah County would be exposed to far more media coverage
So there you
than
go.
people, a community in Ada County.
Can we now?
Point number one was just made. Far more people in Latah County would be exposed to media coverage on this case than in Ada County. Now, remember, we are going through all these documents. We know that that's the first step. They then have to also show that the exposure is prejudicial to the defendant. Okay, but the first step is that there is coverage, right?
I'll switch to the third slide. What does this show?
This adds in 2 additional counties that we were asked to look at. It reflects media exposure specific to Bannock and Camden counties.
And and then there's also a gray area rest of Idaho. You just want to explain what we see here?
Sure. So if you look at the volume of media coverage for the same date range that the first 2, Latah, Ada, and then 4 counties we're looking at, out of all the media exposure for the state of Idaho, Latah received 36%, Ada had 27%, Bannock 1.56%, and Camden just over 3%. The rest of Idaho got just under a third of the meetings. So outside those 4 counties, the rest of the counties in Idaho, or the rest of the people that the rest of the regions in Idaho would have been exposed to approximately 31.53% of the media exposure.
You turn next to, I believe it's page 5. explain what opportunities to be seen are and the differences in the county.
Sure. So in this pie chart, again, we're looking at the same date range. Opportunities to be seen are maybe best described relative to probability versus possibility. Each person in any of these 4 counties, or the rest of Idaho for that matter, have an equal possibility to see a story. It's like flipping a coin. You can flip a coin 100 times and the possibility of it coming up heads is equal every time. The probability of it coming up heads every time is much different. Probability is a mathematical statement, a quantitative measure. And so opportunities to be seen are dependent on a media type. So we measure opportunities to be seen for, say, newspapers based on their circulation. These are paid subscribers who you then infer pay to receive that news, they consume that news. Television has Nielsen audience figures. Nielsen measures those in smaller markets quarterly, in larger markets 6 times a year, I believe. Any of the broadcast markets we're talking about, and the DMAs affecting this pie chart, would be measured quarterly. So opportunities to be seen are the possibility that people in that county would see it. It's the volume of those opportunities that creates the potential opportunity or probability that they've been exposed to X number of articles or media mentions, discrete articles, stories about this topic you're having us track. The numbers reflected on the pie chart show that over half of those opportunities to be seen reside within Latah County, nearly 60% or 57.03%. The opportunities to be seen per person in Ada County is 31.2%, not quite half, but nearly half the opportunities. And that's a simple mathematical function of all the media exposure in that county divided by the population, or in this case, potentially age eligible for jury population.
And in terms of the green sliver there, Canyon County is close to Ada. And so if we assume that Canyon County residents might review Ada County news with its population of 180,000, is the dilution of Latah County or the dilution of Canyon County still significantly greater than the saturation in Latah County?
If I understand the question correctly, how I may answer that is Canyon, and I would also say Bannock, unless you don't want me to mention Bannock, but the media exposure specific to those counties is statistically insignificant relative to the rest of Idaho, Latah County, and Ada County. In fact, if you combined all those two and group them into either one of those, it wouldn't change the inferences that we make on the data between Ada and Latah.
Can you turn to the next slide now? Tell the court which line represents which county and the color.
Sure, the darker line, the red line is maybe the easier one to see. That's Ada County, and the darker line, it's a blue or might look black on the screen, is Latah County.
And Judge, for your purposes, this is C1.
I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because we already went over this chart in the memorandum that I covered. So we did go over this. Actually, I'll probably just go ahead past the charts that we've already covered. He's just explaining them for Judge Judd because he has to, right? This is a hearing on the motion to change venue. It's a big deal, so he has to explain all this stuff. He's still got the chart up here. So basically what this chart is talking about is showing the peaks and dips in the media coverage, right? As in, like, whenever there's for example, when there's a hearing in this case, the more people are exposed to media about it, right? It makes sense. So, but they're trying to say that, they're trying to show the difference. So they've got a chart for each different county. Oh, so she just said she had no further questions. Okay, so that finishes direct. So we're going to get to Ross now. Ross.
So, Ms. Beatty, here.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. Just for my own clarification, on those pie charts, when it says Latah County and Ada County, are you limiting that to the boundaries of the specific county, or are you talking about the broader designated market area?
When what we're looking at is media mentioned that impacted the county.
the county specifically.
Right, so.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So in looking at those line graphs that you presented, I noticed that they started in January of 2023.
Correct.
So December of 2022, Mr. Kohberger was arrested. Were you able to make any determinations of media coverage in December of 2022 at the time Mr. Kohberger was arrested?
We were not engaged nor tracking the media.
Okay. And that's not possible to go back and track that.
We can do what's called a back search, but we can't. Certain media types have expired. Online news links, social media might have been taken down. So you can do it. I wouldn't say I would present it with confidence.
Thank you.
I can show you a number.
Thank you. So fair to say, though, that there probably would have been a pretty substantial spike at that time as well.
I would say yes.
And possibly, although you can't say for sure, that spike could have been even higher than any of the other spikes on this graph, possibly.
The possibility exists.
Thank you, sir. So
Good
for the
answer.
first 6 months on this chart of volume of media coverage over time for Latah and Ada County had more intense media coverage in January, February, March, April, May, and then June, and then in July, there's a crossover where Latah County is higher than Ada County. So fair to say for that first 6 months, Ada County did have at times fairly significantly more media coverage than Latah County.
Correct.
Okay. And council talked with you about these peaks and how they correspond with specific events in the case, such as court hearings. Would you expect that if the court were to make a decision to start closing certain hearings, particularly evidentiary hearings as we approach trial, that would be a mitigating factor that would decrease the amount of media coverage in this case?
I can't say yes or no on that. I would say it depends.
She answered that. What she just said was, would closing the hearings especially close to the trial, make a difference in the amount of media exposure? Don't do that.
Those closed meetings were a public record, then the media most likely that's following this would still have a high probability of reporting on it. They may just not have any image or interviews or some of the elements that go into a more engaging news story.
So the coverage might be less intense.
Intense is a qualification that I'm not able to make. I can't tell you how intense something impacts you as a viewer or a consumer.
Sure, thank you. And I noticed in that chart of Latah County and Ada County coverage that in the last couple of months, that coverage intensity in both of those counties has become pretty close again. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yes.
And so based on these charts, it's really not beyond the realm of possibility that Ada County could again surpass Latah County in coverage, at least at certain points, correct?
Again, there's an equal chance of possibility. The probability based on the data, I would say is no, in my professional opinion. We've already seen an uptick, and it appears that in Ada County, the news is much more focused and attentive, even to what I might consider a less weighted story. I think there was a story recently about a memorial garden or something that
Yeah, the memorial.
this county garnered quite a bit of media.
Classic.
But that's logical.
Sure. Well, in June of 2024, it looks like they got so close that they were just 2 points apart. Is that correct? Latah County just 2 points above.
Yeah.
And you're not willing to testify that there's a possibility that Ada County could potentially surpass Latah County in the future?
I'll absolutely guarantee that possibilities are always equally available.
Good answer.
Thank you, sir.
Good answer. I
I have
mean,
no further questions.
honest.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty, Ms. Mathis.
All right, redirect.
Mr. Murphy, in terms of this discussion on Ada versus Latah, you mentioned the Nielsen rankings. Could you please tell the court the difference between what the Nielsen ranking is? And then I'll follow up with what Latah's is and what Ada County's is. So what's a Nielsen ranking?
Sure. So I don't want to assume that most people have heard of the Nielsen ratings, but anyone who's involved with selling advertising or the news media knows that Nielsen for more than 50 years has measured the top 200 designated market areas. New York City is number one. It's the largest DMA. The media in that market reaches the most people. And so it's a measure of how many
Interesting.
active news consumers is the way I would describe it, are in a city or a city's area. I know we're looking at counties, but your designated market area here in Latah County fall under the radius, I think I mentioned earlier, Spokane, Washington. In Ada County, their designated market area is Boise, Idaho. A different deal.
And what's the Nielsen ranking of Latah County?
It's ranked 64 out
And,
of 210,
and what is Boise?
97.
I have nothing. So I should follow up and say, in terms of how that's measured, 64 mean that is a higher rank than Boise at 97.
The DMA in which Latah County resides has far more opportunities for media stories to be seen based on the strength of the DMA. As you get down to the smaller DMAs, for example, Glendive, Montana, has historically been market 210 last. They have one CBS affiliate.
Wow.
There's just not a lot of news coming out of that area, a
Interesting.
DMA like that.
Interesting.
But
Wow.
on the two counties you're talking about, they reside in a DMA that's 64 for Latah County. A larger DMA is going to have more media opportunities to be seen and more media outlets available. As you get to smaller markets, you have fewer and fewer media outlets serving there.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Beatty?
Nothing for the state, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay,
Witness.
Ms.
All right, guys.
Witness be excused.
He can, Your Honor, and the exhibits that are with him can go for you for the court's paper file for the record.
Thank you. Okay, sir, you're free to leave or you're free to stay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was
Being here.
redirect.
Thank you.
That was redirect, and they're on to the next witness.
Thank you. They're very small letters.
I agree, Your
Welcome.
Honor. It was really hard to get them on one page. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
I love him.
Why don't we take a quick break and maybe
Perfect.
come back at
We're going to skip right past the break, guys.
10:20.
Do, do, do.
Thank you.
Zoom through the break. All right. You know who that lady is.
The testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and
Okay, so now we're moving on to the next witness. First of all, this is now Ann Taylor doing the questioning. She's the lead defense attorney for Bryan Kohberger. She's the one who I think is awesome. This lady who's on the stand, I just saw a glimpse of her. This is the lady who I've had all of the typos and grammar and just her memorandum and or affidavit that we covered in her affidavit in the defense's memorandum that we covered, that again, that like 300 some page document was just absolutely riddled with spelling and typo error, every type of error. So it's going to be really interesting to see if she does a presentation and it's on the screen. Like, did anyone proofread it? Because it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. I just have to say. So, okay. All right.
nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
All right. Thank you. Please have a seat and then please state your name.
Spell your name.
My name is Amani, El-Alayli. Last name is E-L-A-L-A-Y-L-I.
Thank you.
No,
Ms. Taylor.
hold on. You're going to have
Good
to spell
morning.
it again for me.
My name is Amani, El-Alayli. Last name is E-L-A-L-A-Y-L-I.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning. I can see you brought some papers to the witness stand with you today. Will you identify what those are?
Yeah, it's just copies of the slides. It's nothing. None of my things I couldn't see.
Okay, and if the slides, does that refer to the PowerPoint presentation that you for us to share today?
PowerPoint. Oh boy.
At this time, will you place that document in front of you face down? And if you have difficulty seeing the slides, let me know and we'll have.
Yes, this is the blonde defense lady. The same one in the thumbnail. This is Ann Taylor. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, we do.
Have you turn it over so you can track and help us understand what you're going to teach us today, okay? Sure.
Yeah, I want to make sure the state has stipulated to admit that.
That's correct.
Slides. Okay, thank you. So all of the slides that we might be considering today, you agree to.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Will you tell us what you do for work?
I'm a professor, which is the study of how people interact with each other and influence each other, how we're all affected by social situations.
I'm going to ask you some questions so that I can understand your background that led to your ability to teach. But I want to know if you're here today in your capacity as a professor or in your separate role as an expert consultant.
And here's my separate role as a consultant. So what I'll be talking about today is based on my expert opinion, based on the research I've conducted and what I've learned about in the field, and it's not affiliated with the university.
Thank you for that. Now let's go to your education. What degrees do you hold?
So I have a bachelor's in psychology, and I have a master's and PhD in social and personality psychology, with a focus on social psychology.
So
does that mean, focus on social psychology?
yeah, so basically for anyone who didn't see the other coverage we've done about this, she has a very niche field that's very interesting. Her field is studying the validity of surveys, I should say assessing the validity of surveys, which is
so our area, like I mentioned, it studies how we interact with and influence each other, the power of the situation and how it affects us, like how we're all behaving differently here than in our living rooms. It includes things like how people influence us to purchase things. Like I teach a class on social influence, or influence us to donate money. And then my specific area of focus is on social cognition, which is how we select, remember, and interpret social information.
How long have you been teaching?
I have been teaching since before I graduated from my PhD, so since the late 90s. But I started my positions as a professor in 2002.
2002?
2002 at University of Florida, 2003 at Eastern Washington University.
In your role as a professor and a professional, have you written articles and been published?
I have.
How many, roughly?
Roughly 15, give or take.
Do any of those relate to human bias?
Yes, most of them. So a lot of them are focused centrally on bias, and then many of the others are tangentially related to bias. So it could be biased perceptions of ourselves, how we tend to overestimate ourselves in a lot of ways. It includes biased impressions of individuals, like you might take one thing about a person and make a whole bunch of conclusions about them when you don't know them. And that could influence how you perceive their behavior later on.
Mm-hmm.
Have you consulted as an expert in other cases besides Mr. Kohberger's case?
Yes, I consulted in a case around 2016 or so, and then I was involved in the non-dissemination hearing here as well for Mr. Kohberger's case.
So you're telling us that you testified before Mr. Kohberger's case. Is that correct?
Correct.
And have you testified as an expert in any other hearings besides that one for Mr. Kohberger?
For Mr. Kohberger? No, just that one.
How about other people?
Yes, one for, and the case I didn't geek it out. I have a full-time job, plenty to do, but I've been asked to do expert testimony, and I feel like it's the right thing to do to share what I know about bias.
Thank you for that. What is your role today? What did we hire you to do and ask you to do?
So my role was to evaluate how publicity about a case could shape potential jurors when they come in and sit on a panel, and to see if maybe people who were living in Latah County or have some connection to Latah County might potentially have more problems being objective because of media saturation and other issues.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint to help walk through what you have to share today?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to do my best to open that up.
All right, so here's her PowerPoint. Now I wonder, is it going to be riddled with spelling issues, typos, grammar? Let me get this banner pulled down.
I am trying to find the right.
You just go to slideshow.
Oh, she's trying to figure
right to the top, maybe 6 down to the right. One more to the right. And then on the left, or to the front beginning.
Okay. I think we're there. Thank you for helping me through that.
I do this regularly. I'm not teaching.
All right. I want to know if this is the background of the research on potential juror bias. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research on how publicity affects potential jurors. It says roughly 40 years. Really, it's been longer because in the 1960s, there were some high profile cases. And so social scientists wondered, does it matter if there's a lot of publicity about a case? Could that potentially make jurors less objective? Could that influence actual outcomes in a case? And so the research started then, kind of trickled in, and then became more and more popular. And then in 1999, there were enough studies that somebody conducted what's called a meta-analysis. And another one was conducted in 2022. So it's nice to have a recent one. A meta-analysis is when you take a bunch of studies on the same topic and you statistically combine them into one giant study. So they do this in every field. They do this in medicine, every discipline, where you really want to know an overall effect of something. Because I might run a study on the effects of pretrial publicity and find maybe a small effect, and somebody else might find a big effect, and somebody else might find no effect. And it's hard to trust any one study with a few dozen participants, or even if it's hundreds. I would want to see lots of studies. Just like if I were trying to decide if I want to take a medication, I don't want just one study that tells me it works or doesn't work if I have a serious illness or the medication has a serious risk. But I would be much more confident if there were a whole bunch of studies, dozens of studies combined, and thousands of participants' data. And so a meta-analysis basically does that. It narrows down a specific topic, in this case, the effects of pretrial publicity on judgments, and it examines overall, combined, is there an effect? And so there were, like I said, one is quite recent from 2022. So it's the simplest way to describe this research. It's the easiest way for somebody to know where it stands, even if they don't read all the articles. And what this work has found is that if somebody's exposed to publicity about a case, something about the defendant, something about the case, fact, fiction, that the tendency is, if you look at everything as a whole, for it to affect judgments, and specifically how much you like the defendant, your inclination to think that they're guilty, your judgments of their criminality, etc. And this has been shown with individual judgments of guilt, but even more so with group judgments with juries. And it looks at participants who are randomly assigned.
We read about this, and this was one of the really interesting parts. I thought this was really interesting anyway in the in that document, because the interesting thing was how it was different when it was a group versus an individual.
To get pretrial publicity information or not, so that you can really determine cause effect. So this would be a formal experiment. Right. We do lots of studies, and experiments are the ones that I like to look at, because
when Pat, you're right, you're spot on, and they're going to get to that. I don't remember if that's this witness or a different witness, but there's a psychologist who talks about that, and I actually gave it a nickname, the good juror effect, where they want to say they're a good juror, so they say that they don't have a bias or whatever. And that's one of the things, that's actually one of the things that they're using as the basis for this motion to change venue. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things, but that's just one of them, right? That's them saying that the voir dire process isn't going to be enough, because that's the point of the voir dire. So I can't remember if that's her or if that's another witness, though.
What you do is you hold everything constant except for one thing that you change. You get one people, one experience, another group of people, another experience, and then expose them to all the same things. So all the same trial stimulus materials. And you see, okay, the people who got some information ahead of time that they weren't supposed to pay attention to, did they evaluate the evidence differently? Did they come up with different judgments? And so the meta-analysis in 2022 is based on over 11,000 total participants, and it summed up the studies on that specific topic.
And the sum up, what was the sum up?
Yeah, essentially what's on the slide there are the main findings. That the fact that if you get exposed to publicity, you're more likely to render a judgment of guilt, and less likely to, or have lower liking for the defendant, and have higher ratings of their criminality.
Well, you don't
based on your years of teaching and work and understanding.
You don't have to like them, right?
Human bias. Do you know why this happens?
Want to be their best friend.
Yes, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, I have a couple sections here. One is on why we sort of soak up this pretrial publicity in the first place. And then the next section is on why that stays with us through a trial if we are to serve as jurors, even when we don't want it to stay with us. And so if I'm to start with the first topic, why is it that we soak this up in the first place? One reason is because of how we process information. Since the 80s, social psychologists have studied this model that suggests that it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes we think deeply about things and we scrutinize arguments and find flaws in them. And then sometimes we make quick decisions. We like decision shortcuts.
Yeah.
And we only have so much cognitive capacity that the vast majority of our decisions and thought processes are more automatic. And we call this peripheral root processing when it involves an influence situation. So if you're making some kind of determination about something, whether you should purchase a certain car or vote for a certain political candidate or something like that, you can go through and you can analyze every single thing and try to be as objective as possible, or you can make a decision in 2 seconds. Oh, my neighbor has that car and they like it, Yeah. And so the problem with peripheral processing is sometimes you're going to come to a conclusion that you wouldn't have come to before if you had thought about things more methodically, more systematically. And so the reason this applies here is because people, when they're consuming media, are often—
That's a really good example about the buying a new car or, voting at what did she say, an election or something. That was a good point.
And processing peripherally. Why? Because they might not be completely able to focus on a story, or they're scrolling quickly through a news feed. So if you're scrolling through a news feed or a social media feed, or if you're watching the news while you're cooking dinner or something like that, you're taking in information, but you're not able to really devote the resources cognitively to nitpick. And so you'll see something like Bryan Kohberger arrested for the murder of 4 students, or you'll see something like this: among items taken from suspect, knives, guns. And automatically, when we're processing at the superficial level, which again, most of the time we're doing, we'll say, oh, okay, so they found the person who committed the crime and they have evidence. And we don't take it a step further. But if you actually stop and think, then you realize, oh, wait a minute, people get arrested all the time and it turns out they didn't commit a crime. Or wait a minute, we all have knives in our homes, but we haven't all killed somebody. You know, a lot of knives in my
That's a good
kitchen, a lot
point.
of households have guns. And so we don't take that extra step to really think deeply about things a lot of the time when we're consuming media.
It sounds like you're telling me
Well,
that
and I
we're
will
just
say,
absorbing.
and again, this is just me playing devil's advocate, and I'm, there's going to be cross-examination, but I'm sure that part of it. So she gave two good examples. The example she just gave, right, is she's like, well, if you sit there and think about it, like plenty of people get arrested, and it doesn't mean that they actually did the crime or whatever. They don't get convicted. And then she gives the other example, like plenty of people have knives, or we all have knives in our kitchens. It doesn't mean we all killed somebody. But I would suggest that potentially on cross, we're going to hear a thing about, right, but if somebody's given multiples of those examples at the same time, for example, someone's been charged with a crime and they also had a knife, or we know, in other words, these things simultaneously, is that different, right? Is it then maybe less judgmental and more valid? I'm not saying it is or isn't. I'm just saying those things isolated make sense, but together, I think it would affect people differently,
Information. And in Mr. Kohberger's case,
like, for example, if it was just like Bryan Kohberger was found with a knife, but he wasn't charged with the crime, do you think it would have the same effect? No.
from the media, people may take bits and pieces, and that starts to create a level of knowledge or human bias.
We might feel like we know about something more than we do. Yeah.
Are there other ways that bias gets created?
Yes. And it looks like you advance to the next slide. So one thing that's relevant here too is listening to authority figures. So I mentioned that we're processing superficially a lot of the time, peripherally, and one readily available peripheral cue a lot of the time when it comes to this type of situation is hearing information from authority figures, people who have status or expertise, any kind of power, and we tend to listen more to people in those positions. And yes, a lot of the time they have more knowledge, but there are big problems with this. One is that we assume that they're accurate. We forget that they're humans too. That they make mistakes too, that they have biases.
That's not fair. Let's not just make blanket statements, Missy, because, I wouldn't put myself in that category.
Like if I'm in charge of trying to
celebrities,
make a community feel safe by, arresting the right person for a crime, I have a motivation. I want to make sure, I want to convince myself maybe that, I've caught the right person. And, if I'm in that position, doesn't make me less biased, right? We all have biases. All humans have biases. And they also could be wrong. Like I said, people.
And I've brought this up before. That's an issue, right? If the long and short of this is all of us have bias. We all have biases. Not only do we all have biases, we all have subconscious bias. Or what was the other word that I was, we all have subconscious bias, right? Is that the word I'm looking for? The bias that we're not aware of. Yeah. So if that's the long and short of all this, then really what that comes down to is then there's nowhere you can get a jury anywhere, any way, shape, or form, right? Unless you branch out from humans. So that can't be the answer, right, to this question of getting a fair jury. It can't just be, well, everybody's got bias and everybody's got too much, you know what I mean? That's not the answer. So
arrested for a crime when they didn't commit it. And what we found in research over many, many years, decades, is that if somebody has any kind of indicator of authority, even if it's something as minor as height, but certainly, an occupational status, title, that people will take their words so far that they'll do things to contradict their own morals, and they'll be influenced in areas beyond the person's expertise, like a doctor influencing you in your relationships or something that's totally irrelevant. And so we take it a little bit too far. And in the case of Moscow and Latah County, it's a really small community, right? And so the authority figures are often going to be people who are known and well trusted. And, so that makes this effect even potentially more problematic. And, as you know, Chief Fry, the chief of the police at the time, had said that he was certain that he arrested the right suspect and he didn't have any doubts. And so the community would say, okay, well, the chief of police is sure, so then I can be sure too.
100%.
But like I said, we can't assume, and there's no trial that had taken place yet. And so we can't assume that that's accurate information, but we tend to take that a little bit too much at face value.
And the other thing, just to point this out, with this particular case, one thing that they did was right off the bat, right? They had, it's called a gag order, but it's really a non-dissemination order. But really, there's been very little. And actually, the point of it was that what they wanted so that the only information that would come out about this case, and I'm sure we're going to hear about this in this hearing, but the only information that would come out was what's on the public record, which is the court record, right? So court documents, hearings, and stuff like that, right? No one can give interviews. There's nothing else coming out. So, so in other words, that's another factor, because again, one of the things that they have to prove, the defense has to prove, is that there's not just publicity, but it has to be prejudicial, right? And I think that the other standard was it had to also be not factual, if I recall, from the latest document that I covered, or inaccurate, I guess is what they said. So it makes a difference if it's accurate versus inaccurate reporting. So right there, like, it was, for the prosecution, it was a smart move to have this non-dissemination order, and to make sure that people were, like Bill Thompson gave that press conference and said, here, take a look at the PCA instead of speculating. So in other words, any coverage that happens on this is from a trusted media source, regardless of what it is going to be what was allowed, which is, based on the court record, right? Public record. So
the example that you gave of the police chief speaking out and offering what he thinks about a case, is that something that creates more bias in the minds of the Lake Todd County residents that heard that?
Yeah, I mean, they're familiar with him. They know him to be an authority figure. They may know him personally or trust him personally. And so, yeah, somebody outside of Lake Todd County, they'll still be affected by his authority status, but maybe not as much.
Not affected.
Right? And then he also has power over people in that community. And that seems to carry some weight when it comes to this type of influence. And then also, the president of University of Idaho saying, we feel safe now, they found the person. It sounds very conclusive when there hadn't been a trial yet. And so another authority figure is pretty major in an area like Lake Todd because so much is centered around the university.
Are there other ways that you found that create bias?
Yes, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. This is a phenomenon that goes back maybe a century. We've been studying this in so many different contexts, tons and tons of research on this phenomenon called classical conditioning. And it's basically when we make associations between things and it causes us to have reactions that we didn't have before. Like, for example, if your alarm clock, we don't really have alarm clocks that much anymore, but if your alarm sound on your phone, if that's what you use, wakes you up this morning and you have kind of a negative response to it, it might be because you associated it with waking up before you wanted to. Before, I know I always try to choose a sound that I don't have an aversion to, but then it doesn't take long before I have a negative reaction. So you make this connection, right? But if that same tone was used every time a loved one texted me, then I wouldn't develop an aversion. I might develop a favorable reaction. So classical conditioning is when we develop a response to a stimulus. It could be a sound, it could be any stimulus at all, including a person, because we've connected them with something that it has been paired with, especially repeated pairings. So in this particular case, if the defendant's name is seen throughout media and social media a lot, or his image is shown alongside things that are aversive, negative words, things like terror, murder, evil, or alongside known killers, alongside details of the murder, alongside information about, tragic consequences, things that make us feel bad. What happens is it doesn't.
I will say the way that she said that, I think she has a bias, just saying.
Take that many pairings, and then his name alone, which was once neutral, because most people wouldn't have known him, becomes conditioned, and it evokes those same kinds of feelings. And they've done studies like this where they can make this happen within minutes. If I could take a picture of any of you or multiple pictures of any of you, show those interspersed with pictures of other people, and at the same time present words, consciously or not consciously, that say things like terror and evil. And at the end of the study, I can ask people, what do you think of this person? And the rating will be lower. And so if you get that exposure a lot, like in Lake Todd, where people are getting a lot of media exposure and also social media exposure and having a lot of discussions and attending, vigils, and they're really being exposed to kind of all these emotional reactions. If they're thinking about him at the same time, they can't help but make that connection, even if they don't think he's guilty.
So implicit.
Let me make sure I understand how big this is, how far-reaching this is. We've been with this case pending for 1.5 years, and there's been, suffice to say, a lot of media
way
coverage.
to segue.
There's a lot of pictures of Mr. Kohberger in the media. Do you mean that when we walk into trial and the room's full of potential jurors, there's going to be a great majority of them that before we sit down are going to have a feeling of bias against Mr. Kohberger?
Yeah, I do. And you've seen the pictures, these ominous headlines, and that connection can't help but be made.
See, again, these ominous headlines. Why I don't like that she's characterizing it. She shouldn't be doing that, right? Okay. She's here talking about bias and all this, right? When clearly again, it sounds like she's pretty biased herself. And some of the headlines are again, factual. Bryan Kohberger hearing on motion change venue. Okay. That literally tells you no information except there's a hearing, you know? Anyway, I wouldn't call
That's
it
all the way the bias gets created, or do you have another one?
I have one more. As far as things that happen largely while the publicity is coming in and you're getting exposed to it. And it's sort of a category of a lot of different influences that are emotional and motivational. And this one I think is especially relevant to, sourcing people out of Latah County to be jurors. So the media played a role in inducing some emotions like it does. It likes to attract attention, things like fear and anger and sympathy and empathy. But in that community, people are going to have those emotions anyway from everything that's going on. But if the media uses phrases like killer on the loose, everybody stay vigilant, make sure you report all suspicious activity, then they're arousing that even more. And so what happens is when you have emotions like that, they filter in how we process information. Just like when you're angry, you're more likely to remember things that have made you angry in the past than things that have made you happy. And when you're angry, you're also more likely to have kind of an agenda with new information coming in. And so, for example, and this is something that could stay with somebody, this distorted information processing could stay with somebody and could get, there could be a resurgence during a trial where it keeps affecting somebody as they are reminded of their emotions. Because, they've associated moods with different judgments of guilt. Like, for example, if you're angrier, you tend to be more punitive and you want retribution. And in fact, in one study, they associated anger of mock jurors during a trial with support for imposing a death sentence for somebody, and they, when they were angry, they were less likely to pay attention to defense arguments. So people aren't trying to be biased. It's just that when we're in moods, those moods filter how we process information, how we take it in. And, I think I may have mentioned this already, but there's also kind of an emotional, motivational component to feel like the person who committed the crime is under arrest. It is the right person. I think I mentioned it as, being a motivation by the police, but the community has this motivation too in Latah because they were living in fear during all these weeks where they were trying to find somebody to arrest. And somebody was arrested and people said, take a sigh of relief. But that sigh of relief assumes that he's guilty. And so we have this
that is
coping mechanism, basically.
That I've talked a ton about. You guys probably heard me say about that whole interesting, like, cognitive dissonance, if you will, of our Constitution, right? And like the Fifth Amendment right and the right to a fair trial. And then balancing that with the idea that law enforcement has the right person so that there's not like civil unrest, right? And people feel safe. Like, you have to convince them that you have the right person, but yet at the same time tell them they're innocent until proven guilty. You know what I mean? Like, it is asking a lot of people to believe both at the same time, to be sure.
Where we want to get rid of these negative emotions. And one way to do that is to feel like, oh, well, if he committed a crime and he's under arrest, then I can feel safe now. And so that's something that could come into play too if you live within the region where the event occurred.
And that's because of the fear that was associated with it.
Any of the emotions really could potentially distort information processing. That last point relevant to fear, but a lot of research on how anger influences judgments and how sympathy for victims, empathy for victims influences judgments. And certainly if you are in Latah and have attended vigils or offered social support, you're really getting a lot of that empathy and sympathy as well, or if you're exposed to the personal media stories about what happened.
So I think I understand the ways that the human bias just gets bigger and more solid in a person. What happens if we seat a Latah County jury and those biases are there? What happens as we put on the trial and evidence is presented?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this one can get carried through the trial, this idea of motivational and emotional sources, but there are other things that can happen during trial too that kind of exacerbate the problem. And one of these is confirmation bias. So this has to do with us wanting to confirm our expectations. And one of the most fundamental human needs we have is a need for predictability. You don't want to walk into this courtroom and feel like you have no idea what's going to happen. That's uncomfortable. You want to feel like we know what's going to happen. And we know how people are going to behave. And so part of this need for predictability is that it causes us to distort reality a little bit. And so in one way that this does this is through the confirmation bias, which is once we develop an expectation of something, once we decide that this is true, this is the case, or the defendant is guilty or not guilty, or the defendant lives a certain lifestyle or behaves a certain way, or then once we decide something, everything goes through that filter. I talked about an emotional filter. This is a cognitive filter that we actually process information differently based on what we expect to see and hear. It's just like if, you're going to meet up with a friend and you think somebody called your name, you expected it. And so it made you hear it even when it didn't happen. And if somebody does call your name, you hear it more readily. So we're kind of tuned in. And so the processes I mentioned here, this filtering can happen via 3 different processes. One is selective attention. So if I'm a juror And I have expectations about Mr. Kohberger. And it doesn't have to be just that he's guilty, but it could be expectations about him as a person. If I have expectations coming in and I'm getting all this new evidence during trial, going through that filter and paying attention to information that backs up my idea. Well, I had this idea that he's a bad guy, and this information backs that up. So I pay extra attention to that. And then they talked about something where, where he was kind to someone, and I really have to pay much attention to it. So, we have this filter, and then we process information to in a distorted manner. We have to change the information to fit in with what we think. It's just a way of our mind simplifying our worlds. And while these processes all help us not be overloaded cognitively, they distort what we take in. So we have to be aware of them. And recall is distorted as well. So, a trial takes place over a long period of time, potentially, and somebody has to remember a lot of information. And if they have distorted recall that's consistent with their expectations before coming in, that's obviously problematic.
Is that the only thing that happens when we have new information at trial?
No, I have a couple other things that I'd like to talk about. And the first one is belief perseverance, which is really a direct consequence of the confirmation bias. So it's just like it sounds. This is the tendency for our beliefs to persevere, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias supplies us with this filter. And because we have this filter, if somebody gives us all these facts that go against what we think, logically, we should just change our minds. A lot of the time we don't. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest that sometimes we even cling more closely to our beliefs. And anyone who's looked at anything on social media has probably seen evidence of this, where somebody has a strong belief about something and then somebody provides actual facts that contradict it. And then instead of saying, oh, you're right, I see your point. Of course, that can happen sometimes. The general tendency is for people to still stick with their beliefs anyway, because they formed them. When you're in the process of
I wouldn't use social media as an example, though, like for a whole long list of reasons I won't even go into. I think the jury deliberation process is very different.
Your beliefs, that's different. But once you form something, it tends to stick.
Your point.
It's the same thing with stereotypes. Somebody has an assumption that elderly people are bad drivers, and they see a whole bunch of evidence suggesting otherwise, and even research studies and things like that. Then they no, I still think elderly people are bad drivers. So that's belief perseverance. And in some cases, people will even double down. Again, social media, they might even get more aggressively in line with their initial opinion after seeing evidence to the contrary. So this is one reason it's directly aligned with confirmation bias.
It sounds like they can work together when somebody already has a bias. They've already made decisions about.
Yeah, really any expectation or decision or judgment, even if you don't know that you have it. I heard the phrase of growing legs. Well, there's a famous social influence researcher who used that same phrase with decision making. Like once you've decided something, your decision grows legs of its own. And so now it's not just the normal information necessary that for any rational person, because we all kind of have this tendency to be irrational in situations like this. But it ends up causing us to distort reality a little bit and need a lot more evidence now than we should to change our minds.
What else impacts getting new information in the course of the trial?
We'll advance to the next slide. I want to mention a little bit about cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable feeling we have when we have like an inner clash, like an inner hypocrisy, like if I'm religious, but I don't adhere to one thing about my religion, and there's this inner clash. And we don't like that feeling. Right. We like to reduce it, minimize it, prevent it.
So I feel like we also, we did cover all this. Like I said, we read through this is all.
So why is that relevant here?
Away from the document.
They have the information
because of the loyalty of
they're like picturing yourself sort of committed by the case. I just don't see the memory is ourselves is better than average and to overestimate ourselves.
Right, that's probably
so they're going to say they're
pause it and do it this way. But yeah, we did cover all this because this was all this was in the that document, and we covered it. There's your conclusions. That's what I wanted to get to. Okay, excellent.
Them, their feelings of safety, the community. They don't have to worry about reporting back, and other people maybe ostracizing them if they didn't make the judgment that was expected or wanted. And so my recommendation would be to find a community to recruit jurors from that's as far removed from LATAW as possible, physically and psychologically.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions for you, but if you hold on just a minute, I think Ms. Katie might.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
Examination.
Debate.
Your Honor. In any jurisdiction where there's been a tremendous amount of pretrial publicity, at least some of these biases would apply to a prospective jury pool, correct?
Yeah.
And the best thing, if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, for this trial
would be to have a jury pool with the largest percentage of jurors who hadn't formed an opinion on this case already. Would that be fair to say?
I mean, you need, I can't speak to percentages. You need somehow to find enough people to serve on the jury who have not been exposed. Now, this is a high profile case, so we know the exposure is all over the state, and of course, this is part of it. But if you can have less exposure, you have less bias potential.
In a case like this, where there's been so much exposure across all counties, are there unique challenges in selecting a jury that would apply anywhere?
So, well, I mentioned some unique things about Latah County and emotional investment in the community, concern for community members, and having felt that fear and wanting the defendant to be guilty so that they could resolve the fear and anger. So there are all those emotional and social connections, and of course, Dr. Edelman's report, which will come up later, shows that a lot of people who live in Latah County are connected in some way to the university or the police involved in the case. So they actually know people or they lived in Latah County, and so those kinds of things make. Because it's such a small community, make Latah a unique experience.
And so you've reviewed Dr. Edelman's survey.
I have.
So does it sound correct that 75% of folks in Latah County are not affiliated with the university?
I don't recall his percentages.
Okay.
So offhand, I'd have to see the report. I could look at it if you'd like.
Okay. And I should be more precise. I believe the question was, are you or a family member, a student or employee at the University of Idaho in Moscow? And the percentage of folks who responded no was 75%. Does that sound right?
I couldn't tell you without seeing it. Sorry, I don't remember.
Would it surprise you to find out that 60%?
I can tell you that that's not accurate because I've read that document. The answer was they didn't give the percentage if you said no. They gave the percentage if you said yes, and it was 25% because that's a reframing.
Of Latah County residents who were surveyed reported that they did not feel higher levels of stress or anxiety during the hunt for the killer in this case.
I don't know. I don't know what percentage I would have estimated. I just would have estimated it to be higher in Latah.
Okay. So is one strategy that the court could use in any jurisdiction, whether the trial stays in Latah County or moves to Ada County, would bringing in a larger jury pool alleviate some of these concerns across any jurisdiction?
Well, if we're talking about Latah County, a lot of the things that I mentioned were not in the survey. So, there are emotions I mentioned that weren't assessed during the survey, impressions of Mr. Kohberger that weren't in the survey. So it could be that 90% of people think he's a bad guy, but they don't think he's guilty. And then that still could influence judgment. So it's really hard to answer that question without, I didn't make the survey. And even if I did, there'd be a lot of things that I would miss too, so I can't make that determination about, you said maybe you can restate it and I can.
No, I appreciate the answer. Thank you. Now, I guess the last question I'll ask you is, would you be surprised to find out that in the survey, when jurors were asked, potential jurors who were responding to the survey were asked what their opinion is of Bryan Kohberger, the highest percentage of prospective jurors that were surveyed who had no opinion of Mr. Kohberger were Latah County survey respondents. So that's a question.
That they have no opinion about whether he is guilty.
I think the question is just, do you have an opinion of Mr. Kohberger?
Well, it's a high profile case that had a lot of coverage and the percentages are so high that people who have an opinion, I imagine, I don't have those in front of me, but in statistics, we call that a ceiling effect when all the percentages are high and you can't really see differences. So I don't know if we're talking, I don't know what numbers you're looking at, but I don't know if that applies or not in this particular case.
Thank you. I have further questions.
Ms. Taylor?
Yes, just a few questions for you. Your focus is on human bias, is that right?
Correct.
And you talked to us about media exposure and how that forms bias. Are bias and forming an opinion, you're willing to say different things?
Bias can come from lots of things, one of which is an opinion that was formed, and then bias can shape another opinion that gets formed, if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. You talked to us a little bit earlier about how that bias gets formed. And then you told us sometimes we won't be able to spit out our entire bias or what we looked at to form bias.
Wow.
Is there a danger in a case like this where there's been a lot of media coverage that somehow we see a jury, but they start remembering things they read in the paper and trying to make the evidence fit into that filter?
Oh yeah, of course. So Dr. Edelman's report, I remember, said that people didn't list everything that they recalled, but when they were prompted to ask about to indicate whether they remembered specific things, then they remembered a whole bunch of things. The same thing would happen during a trial, right? Those retrieval cues, anything that reminds you of something. So our minds have kind of an association network. All of our memories are sort of connected in some way. You could just mention the word white, and maybe I think of snow. So our memories can come up from so many things that I would be surprised if there weren't some memories rekindled.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thanks, Ms. Taylor. Any more questions?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
And you made this witness to excuse?
Yes.
All right. And no objection to that?
No,
All right.
Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. You're free to stay. You're free to stay or leave. All right. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thank you. Okay, next witness.
Next witness is Dr. Bryan Edelman.
Okay,
All righty, Dr. Edelman.
Dr. Edelman.
I wonder if this gets spicy like
All right,
last time.
welcome back. Please raise your right hand.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury.
I do. All right, thank you, sir. Please have a seat and then please state your name and spell your last.
We're gonna speak slow today. So Bryan Edelman, Edelman.
So remember,
Sir,
when he testified previously,
Thank you.
he had not yet finished concluding the juror surveys for that were needed, right? And so part of the thing is they were asking for more time to complete the juror surveys so that then they could have that done and then have the finalized data. So I'm guessing here, and that we're going to get his final conclusions with the data that he obtained from surveys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Edelman, I see that you brought some things to council table with you.
I did.
What do you have?
It's just a copy of my presentation.
Your PowerPoint presentation? Okay. And is that face down?
Better be.
Perfect. Will you let me know if you need to flip it over to refresh your memory?
I can tell you the second you start, I won't be able to see anything, so never did.
Okay. Your Honor, counsel, then I'll ask if he can leave his PowerPoint presentation
He's like,
face
I'm
up
the
so he
Dr.
can
Hughes.
help us understand this testimony. No objection to that.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, let's start with your background.
Just going back how far? Let me try this.
Oh my God.
Let's start with what you do right now and then.
Going back how far? Well, sir, why don't you start out the same way that the first witness did with how did your parents meet and how were you conceived or when were you conceived? Dude, that was so funny.
Work backwards and forwards. How about that?
Okay. I'm a trial consultant. So in that capacity, I'm often in the courtroom doing jury selections and assisting with that, writing juror questionnaires, helping attorneys craft the role of voir dire questions. And I also do pretrial research. So that's focus groups and mock trials. And then I also do post-trial interviews and do a lot of presentations and writing in terms of trying to educate or help the legal community. And then I also serve as an expert witness in this capacity. And in that scenario, I'm often focusing on pretrial publicity, the impact of pretrial publicity, and whether or not a defendant's due process rights may have been undermined by media coverage. And I also do post-conviction work, which kind of ties into that, where I might be brought in to look at a case to see if there was a lot of media coverage and whether or not there should have been a change of venue or a request for a change of venue, and looking at the adequacy of voir dire to
If I recall from when he testified previously, it was pretty clear that he's very much, where it was pretty clear where he stands. And, I would imagine that if you work in his field and you see you get all the data that he receives and see how the messed up things people say about people that are still innocent until proven guilty, then, perhaps it might, again, in a way, I would say it's a little bit of a bias, right? I would say that somebody like him and then the previous expert would lean towards, if they had to guess, not that I'm saying they would, but hypothetically, that they would make an assumption that if you were to go into any community anywhere, they would probably be like, yeah, that jury pool is tainted. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying they're wrong in thinking that. I'm just saying that again, doesn't align, or that does not help. That doesn't help how the justice system is set up, right? Because of the fact that it is such a big deal to change venue, and you are supposed to try to get a fair trial in your community. So that's the problem, right?
uncover what jurors need. So that's kind of reviewing the voir dire transcripts and use of challenges and that sort of thing.
How long have you been doing that work?
That part, since I think the first one maybe like 2011, 2012, something like that.
Where do you do that work? What company?
So all over the place. So all over the country in state and federal cases, Florida, Michigan, Washington, DC, Idaho, California, Texas, New York, a bunch of others. So
How were you educated to do the work that?
So I have a background in social psychology, so a PhD in social psychology from the University of Nevada, Reno, which is a program that really focuses on psychology and law. That's where the judicial college is, and something called the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies. Am I going slow or I do better? Okay. And while there, I worked at the Grant Sawyer Center for Justice Studies as well, and did research on the death penalty, so on pretrial release programs and the impact of media coverage. So kind of similar to this. And when I finished that, I went to England and got an LLM in international humanitarian law, and then came back here and started working at a trial consulting firm. I started in 2000, I want to say 2004. That sounds about right. 2000, I think. And then started my own or co-founded Trial Innovations, where I am now, with a business partner in 2011.
Do you do any teaching about your
Teaching? So I do like CLE classes and things like that for bar associations. I've done it for public defenders, for district attorneys' offices. I've been like a visiting lecturer at like different law schools, at the ASTC, which is the American Society of Trial Consultants. Did classes on like trial consulting and change of venue. I think I've done one at APLS, which is like the American Psychology Association, a legal society. And I'm sure there's some others out there too. ABOTA is one, and that might be more on like jury selection. That's like a legal organization.
Are you a member of any organizations, professional organizations specific to your work?
Currently, I don't think I'm a member of ASTC, which is American Society of Trial Consultants, but I might have forgot to pay my dues this year, so maybe not.
Are you usually a member of that organization?
And same with APLS.
What's APLS again?
That's the American Psychology Association, and it's the legal society division. And then I also do for like the ASTC, I've been like a committee that helps rank some of the professional guidelines, particularly around change of venue.
And I understand you do consulting work. Do you testify as an expert?
Yes.
What states?
What states?
Roughly.
Okay. Kind of the ones I mentioned earlier. I'm sure there's more. So Florida, Michigan, California, Washington State, Washington, D.C., Texas, Idaho, which I have a map in front of me right now. Tennessee, Georgia, Minnesota, and I'm sure there's others, but there's been a long time, so I've done a bunch of them. I've probably done over 100 that I've been retained on for in some capacity related to pretrial publicity in both state and federal cases.
I heard you mention Idaho. You testified as an expert in Idaho, is that right?
I have.
How about in this case? Have you testified before in this case?
In this case,
yes.
I did.
All right.
Yes.
Last time we were here, we were talking about a survey that was in progress.
Yes.
So have you now completed your survey?
Yeah, so I did a survey in Latah County and then conducted several comparison surveys after that hearing in Ada County, Bannock County, and Canyon County.
Before we get to all of those, I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation that you've provided for us today, so you can walk me through the process of what you do and how that works. Give me just one moment.
Sure. I'm going to flip this over then.
Okay, and I hate to say it, before we get into his PowerPoint, because this is probably a good stopping point. I actually do have a lesson in just a couple minutes. So I'm going to have to call part one for now. But part two, I know that there's at some point, there's like a long break in here. So if I had to guess, part two, we will pick up where we left off right here with Dr. Edelman's PowerPoint presentation. And then I think we'll be able to jump right into the argument, which is always the best part of a hearing, right? Love that. So yeah, so I think that'll be it for this one. For those of you guys who are following the Ezra trial, Wisconsin versus Ezra McCandless, I do believe we'll have the next episode tomorrow for you guys. And for the previous episode, that has been, all the timestamps are complete and all that. But I think that will be it for now. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being a squirrel. And I will see you guys next time.